attention by the American authorities. I don't think we should gloss it over or ignore it to a low priority task. Must be taken forward with in a professional, investigative manner,
Mm.
and accountability must be ensured because big names are coming. Then I think America needs to actually shake itself up. Otherwise, it's heading for something very, very dangerous. Back to you, Thomas.
Accountability, of course, is the question. We seem to just be getting straight up denials from all these officials about involvement. And we heard from Lutnick, for example, who denied a meeting or communication within a certain time frame. And then it was disproved once again when more of these files came out. Of course, the same thing has happened to Donald Trump himself with previous releases. How will accountability be given moving forward? Do we expect the Trump administration or those in power to be asked more about it, to be debunked furthermore? Any responsibility to be taken here? Further explanation? Are there any checks and balances that can be put forward that will give Lutnick and others to provide explanation about these communications, which have now been proved?
Good question. A very sharp and brilliant question you have asked. America is the oldest democracy. It has got the oldest constitution based on which the country is running, and it's a time-tested one. Many of its articles have been subjected to revision, revisits by relevant authorities. And I personally feel that it's a good question. There are no quick answers because the America being what it is going through today, it doesn't have a quick solution. I personally feel the people of America have to come onto the street. They have to galvanize. They have to speak in one voice. What kind of future for the America do they expect? Do they expect these kind of things? Do they expect ice killing? Do they expect tariff to be imposed and the inflation to be taken, the brunt of inflation to be taken by the customers? Do they expect the backyard Maduro, no matter what the reason is to be president and his wife to be picked up at the middle of the night? Is this the new rule of law? So the people of America are the strength and the weaknesses. If they accept what is coming forward, well, I have nothing to say. It is their country, it is their constitution, it is their leader. They have elected Donald Trump. I think it's about time they have to demand for a very, very apolitical, neutral kind of organization or establishment which must, go deeper into each of the issues, totally apolitical, without any prejudice or any kind of biases to any government. Selection of nomination of the people will require a great deal of scrutiny by people who enjoy the status of some kind of a neutrality. They have proven credentials in the past. Those are the people who must be given this job. They must be assigned the task of investigation and coming to the fine conclusion as to whether a person was actually involved or it is subject to, being dismissed by the accused as is being done now. Back to you, Thomas.
Of course, there's been flip-flapping when it comes to this issue. Donald Trump's constant efforts to push this story out of the headlines have not been successful. The singular, one could say, issue where that has occurred. And now, of course, we're seeing further and further names in his administration and in his orbit, which are being put forward. In terms of taking accountability from the press, what are your thoughts in the way that the media haven't been briefed on this situation in particular? There has been no press conference where all of those named have been gathered into one room and have been questioned by the press. Do you think that Donald Trump, if he does this, would that there would be more confidence in the American people behind this act?
Yes, possibly. Yes, you have a point. I tend to agree with you. But unfortunately, you know the reality. That part of the Western Hemisphere is known to you. The fact remains that today the American pillars of democracy, they are being driven by invisible deep state. You just took the name of media. Unfortunately, I must call it out in a very subtle manner as far as possible. Talk about the judiciary. You see the composition of the Supreme Court. How many are the sponsor or the linkages they have with the Republicans? Donald Trump himself, he has nominated or he has sponsored those out of 9 benches. I think 6 of them they belong to Republican affiliated judiciary representative. Similarly, the media is also deeply penetrated and is being driven by or controlled by more or less by the deep state. Now, who are the deep state? That is well known to people in the environment. Talk about the defense industry, talk about any multinational. They have whoever has got money by and large, I would say, is able to influence the decision making and control or regulate a kind of a shadow government behind the elected representative. Otherwise, Donald Trump would have been behaving in a different manner. Why is he going berserk? So, third and most important thing is no matter what we say, judiciary is judiciary. I personally feel, apart from what you have just highlighted about the media briefing, maybe the judiciary may have to take a very special and exclusive kind of effort and view on the whole issue. There has to be a kind of a exclusion or in camera kind of a deliberation on the whole issue. Most probably, whatever the judiciary is deciding, in my understanding, it is getting leaked out to Donald Trump and his dispensation. That's how people have been dilly-dallying. They have a high degree of influence on everyone, judiciary, media, all kinds of investigative agencies. Therefore, the rule of law in America today actually stands to collapse very soon. It's extremely not vulnerable. That vulnerability stage has already been penetrated by forces inimical. They have to actually revisit the whole thing. They have to look at the clause in the Constitution. The Constitution has to have the relevant insertion of these kind of things when the morality, the ethics of the nation, the character of the nation is held at stake. Then perhaps I think the whole nation has to come together and regardless of what the leadership is actually driving or divulging, they have to demand. People's demand cannot be denied. It
Okay.
has to be proven, and the best way to do is to take it to the floor of the House, prove the confidence motion of the leadership. And if he passes the motion, then he becomes the leader. If he doesn't, let the new leadership take on.
Major General Sadaka Ji, thank you very much as always for joining us. It's a pleasure to talk to you on these issues. We have some breaking news coming up next from the South Asian region, and deadly violence has erupted in Pakistan's southwestern Balochistan province. At least 10 security personnel and 37 terrorists were killed after ethnic Baloch separatists launched coordinated attacks across the region. Officials say the assaults targeted more than a dozen locations earlier today. Security forces responded with counter-operations, killing dozens of terrorists and leaving several personnel injured. We'll of course continue to bring you the updates from that developing situation out of Balochistan as soon as we get them. We turn back to the US government, and the government entered a partial shutdown on Saturday after a midnight funding deadline passed without approval of a 2026 budget. While roughly 3/4 of federal operations are affected, disruption is expected to be limited, with the House set to ratify a Senate-backed deal earlier next week. The shutdown was triggered by a breakdown in negotiations over new funding for the Department of Homeland Security following Democratic anger over the fatal shootings of 2 protesters in Minneapolis by federal immigration agents. Though the shutdown began, lawmakers in both parties expressed confidence that a swift resolution is likely, with the Senate clearing the way for a quick end to the disruption. If prolonged, tens of thousands of federal workers could face unpaid leave once again. Okay, of course, this would come as there has been several protests from Democratic senators given the killings of 2 US individuals in Minneapolis, causing partisan outcry. Major General G joins us once again. Apologies for that incident that had just occurred.
No,
This US government shutdown, why has the government struggled in passing this 2026 budget? And what does it say about the state of the Senate right now?
I couldn't hear your preamble. By then I had switched off. If you can just go over the narrative that in your question, please. What is the background like, please?
The government has entered a partial shutdown after the midnight funding deadline passed without the approval of the 2026 budget. It was triggered by a breakdown in negotiations over new funding for the Department of Homeland Security following this democratic anger over the killing of Renee Good and Alex Pretty. What does this say about the state of the Senate right now? And do you think we'll be facing a prolonged government shutdown like we saw in the latter stage of 2025?
I hope not, because it's not only one dot. If you join the dots, then it's a series of such unprecedented activities that have taken place related to political dispensation that it gives a clear indication that it's going to be a prolonged one. And Donald Trump would do well if they actually have some kind of a grievance, redressal of the grievance module existing so that people's voice should be heard. I'm given to understand by my friends in USA that he's blocking off all the means of communication, channels of communication. That's a very dangerous thing to happen. If that happens, a couple of months back, 70 lakh people, 7 million people had come on the street. Thomas, I can only predict that things could go worse because the situation in the USA today is very, very precarious. It is extremely dangerous from one thing to another. Here is a midnight closure being announced by Donald Trump. Basically, it is to protect his dispensation so that they are not subjected to, they are not vulnerable to any attack by the people. People are totally agitated, they are angry. So before any such decisions are taken, I would personally feel he needs to have some kind of a engagement with the people's grievances. There must be some kind of a channel of communication open. Otherwise, media is almost in a virtual, I would say, not being given the right kind of information, and the judiciary is also in a way being insulated. So the right thing, the rule of law is not being protected. That is the bigger danger and harm being coming the way the America. This needs to be actually addressed in a very comprehensive, holistic manner by engaging with the stakeholders, not by keeping them away. Back to you, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Major General G, for joining us. It's a pleasure to talk to you. We now turn over to the African continent, and a mine collapse in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo has killed more than 200 people. The disaster occurred on Wednesday at the Rubaya Coltan mine, which has been controlled by the M23 rebel group since 2024. The Rubaya site produces about 15% of the world's coltan, a key metal used in mobile phones, computers, aerospace components and gas turbines. Victims include miners, children and market women. While dozens were rescued with serious injuries, an advisor to the governor confirmed that at least 227 deaths had occurred, though the toll may rise. The United Nations says M23 has plundered the mine to fund its insurgency, allegations Rwanda denies. The rebels captured more mineral-rich territory last year, claiming to protect the Tutsi minority. Joining us now to discuss this devastating incident in DRC is Ayanuga Olugbenga Paul, a public affairs analyst, joining us live from Lagos in Nigeria. Thank you very much
for having me on the show.
For joining us. It's a pleasure to have you. What is the scale of this collapse at this coltan mine? Tell us about the current state in these M23 controlled areas. And Rwanda, of course, is denying that the M23 is using the coltan mines to fund their insurgency. What's your analysis on that?
Well, the M23 as a rebel group, as we know it, first and foremost, does not have the capacity yet to be able to run a state properly. Hence, they engage in all of these hand-wringing tactics of using artisanal miners in unconventional way, most of them without protective equipment, proper protection inside the mine, because many of the mine are not constructed using standard equipment where wedges that will hold the mine from collapse will be put in place, and other structures that will make the mine stand. And that is why whenever there is heavy rainfall, we see this situation where mine collapse happen. And in the current case, where it is reported across several media that about 227 have been recorded so far, even though the number could be more than that, that have died, and about 20 were rescued immediately before the mine collapsed. So we see a lot of people being sent to this dangerous position because there is no standard government in those places, and rebel will be what they are. They are akin to slave traders in their modus operandi. Sometimes such that they will be able to make money. And I feel really bad for Rwanda trying to be the spokesperson for the M23 rebel, because Rwanda has continuously denied that it does not have a say in the M23 rebel affair. So if we are accusing M23 rebel of mining all this mineral-rich region to fund its, campaign in holding on to the territories that they have gained, that is nothing but the truth. But now Rwanda jumping to quickly support them will make it look like, so all the denials that you have been doing since all this while that you have nothing to do with M23 rebel are just lies, and those lies are collapsing in the face of proper scrutiny right now. And I don't see this current collapse as last in the series of collapse that might still likely happen, because most often than not, this one, because of the sheer scale of it, got out to the media. The smaller cases, they might even shut down the story from getting out. And that's why you see that a lot of people who spoke to media on this matter spoke on condition of anonymity, because they were not authorized to speak. But there is this human feeling urge that how can over 200 people lose their life in one sweep because of the carelessness and greed of some certain people, and that is why they are speaking. But in smaller scenarios that have been happening, that I'm sure is happening in that region, they would make sure the news does not get out to the public to be able to hear or learn about it. And I don't see them doing anything in terms of re-engineering many of the mines that people are still being forced into labor to work there for peanuts, money that could barely buy them good clothes, not to talk, even food, not to talk of clothes in most cases. So, but people, the natural human instinct is to survive, and in survival, you want to provide for your family, you want to provide food and all the rest. So people have no alternative or choice than to work in some of these mines, as they are trapped in the war-torn zones, so they don't have opportunities to be able to escape this vicious circle. But I just hope that international organization will, beyond the rhetorics, the play of words, find something to do to assist, if it means recognizing the M23 rebel, so that they can, have standard government and standard structure in place to govern the area and provide infrastructures that will regularize all these mining activities, and there will be no illegal activity going on there. Even though you can't stop it totally, but at least it will be reduced drastically. So that this can happen, we need the international organization like UN, like USAID and all the rest of them to take this step and start this discussion. This grandstanding by the Congolese government that they are not ceding any part of the country, and it will not work, because I don't see the rebels ceding any part of the territories that they have taken.
Yes, do stay with us, Ayanuga, as we go on to our next story. And we turn to The Hague, and Rohingya survivors are expecting the International Court of Justice to rule Myanmar committed genocide against their people. The case, brought by Gambia, follows the 2017 military crackdown that forced over 730,000 Rohingya to flee their homes. Myanmar has denied the genocide allegations, claiming that the offensive was a legitimate counter-terrorism operation. However, survivors have recounted mass killings, rape and arson, with a UN mission concluding that genocidal acts were committed. A judgment is expected in 3 to 6 months, and the outcome could impact other ongoing cases, including South Africa's genocide case against Israel. Ayanuga joins us once again. If the ICJ confirms that genocide occurred, does that mean a breakthrough for accountability internationally?
It's going to be a very big breakthrough for accountability internationally, because this will not just have effect on the Rohingya or even the Israeli-Palestinian situation. It would also have far-reaching effect on the Uyghur, people versus the Chinese government situation. And all of these people will be able to now properly have a basis to seek for justice to go around in all these places. And because of the many international actors that will be affected negatively if the Rohingya people are able to get justice, I see it like, making the passing the camel through the eye of the needle kind of situation for that justice to be able to happen, because I'm sure that China, knowing fully well that the Uyghur people would want to, demand their own case to also be settled, will do everything to thwart the success of such hearing. The Israeli, we know how they can undo with their Mossad and intelligence network across the world, and how they seem like the hand controlling a lot of things in a lot of places, both seen and unseen. So I personally am skeptical, that the Rohingya people will be able to get justice. But if the judiciary at the ICJ, are able to stand firm against all propaganda that will be raised against them, against all kind of crackdown that might be raised against them to thwart this case, if they stand their ground and they are able to deliver justice to the Rohingya people, because it is clear to the blind, it is very audible to the deaf, that what happened in Myanmar with the Rohingya people is pure case of genocide. There is no two way to it. The fact that it is the Rohingya today, it can be my people tomorrow, it can be your people tomorrow, and that is why we must call it as it is, that it is a situation of pure genocide, and the court should rule as such. But of course, there are several technicalities that lawyers from both sides will be able to put forward, and it is not about who is right or who is wrong. It is about based on the evidences that are able to be placed and the convictions that the lawyers are able to make before the justices. Don't forget that this case was instituted by Gambia in Africa here against Myanmar. And so a lot of technicalities may arise along the way, vis-a-vis the local standard of why does the Gambia has the capability to, it's not their matter and things like that. I'm not a lawyer, but I know that many technicalities in the law will be explored to thwart the case. But if this comes out successful, that the Rohingya people are able to get justice, then it will have far-reaching effect across the world and will send shockwaves in many places that will be good for the oppressed in several places across the world.
Ayanuga Olubenga Paul, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us. It's always a great pleasure in speaking to you. We now move on, and a US federal judge has signaled that she may dismiss a lawsuit filed by Elon Musk's AI startup XAI against rival OpenAI. XAI accused OpenAI of stealing trade secrets by poaching employees to gain an unfair advantage in developing AI technology. However, US District Judge Rita Lynn says she tentatively agrees with OpenAI's motion to dismiss, stating that XAI did not plausibly allege theft of trade secrets. The hearing on February the 3rd will decide whether XAI can amend its claims. This lawsuit is part of a larger legal battle between Musk and OpenAI, with Musk seeking $134.5 billion in damages. Well, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome. You're watching Trending Tech on NewsX World, where we bring you the latest tech breakthroughs and trends from around the globe. The line between the real world and the virtual world is disappearing faster than ever. Today we discuss how AI, the metaverse and gaming are no longer just ideas, they're real forces shaping how we work, play and earn. From immersive digital workplaces driving global productivity to the rapid rise in Web3 and play-to-earn gaming, virtual worlds are creating new economies and new identities. But with this growth comes responsibility, concerns around data privacy, AI bias and fair access are growing louder. And as we look ahead to 2030 with hyper-real simulations and fully connected digital worlds, one question stands out. Are we truly ready to thrive in these virtual frontiers? To discuss all this and more, joining us now is Dr. Jane Thomason, a futurist, author and global thought leader in AI, Web3, gaming and digital transformation. She's a voice in blockchain and helps startups globally championing ethical innovation and a human-centered digital future. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Thomason. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get straight into this. As a futurist in AI and digital transformation, how do you envision the metaverse evolving with AI integration, and what trends like virtual economies and immersive workspaces could mean for global productivity in the coming years?
Look, thanks for the question. And I think it's absolutely timely to be having this conversation, because increasingly, as people are using immersive spaces, and I'm not going to stick with the term metaverse because people get that confused with Mark Zuckerberg and Meta, and talk about immersive spaces and what's happening in immersive spaces. And we've learnt a lot from gaming because they were one of the first immersive spaces. But what we're seeing now is that in almost every industry, with digital twins, with planning, with remote workplaces where people are able to work all around the world, these immersive workspaces are going to get very much the norm rather than unusual. And with AI, what you've actually got is these AI agents, digital colleagues, agents that can help people design, plan, collaborate. They'll be able to, in digital economies, Your metaverse AI agents will be trading tokens, creating jobs and skills, so people will be able to work globally without moving cities or countries, and they'll be able to collaborate globally. So the productivity boost comes from smarter coordination, less travel, and more effective use of these digital spaces that are already available to us.
Indeed, and Dr. Thomason, as a thought leader in gaming, India is experiencing one of the highest uptakes in Web3 gaming globally, with millions engaging in play-to-earn models and blockchain-integrated metaverses. How are these trends, powered by AI-driven avatars, transforming the industry, and what implications do they hold for the future of social interaction, entertainment, and economic opportunity?
Well, I think the big things for India is, first of all, mobile first, because most people or many people have got access to mobile technology, and a lot of these games are now able to be played on mobile technology quite cheaply. Now, the whole gaming aspect of it, the play-to-earn games, means that people can earn very small amounts of money from playing games. But in India, where there are a lot of people who are living still in poverty, then this makes a difference to them. But I think the big story for India, and this is where I would encourage anyone who's listening to think about it, is 3.2 billion people in the world play games, whether they're video games or whether they're serious games or whether it's gamification of industries. This is a massive and growing sector. And so I think for India, the opportunity of building that economy and building that sector and giving people the opportunity to learn the skills to be able to work in gaming is going to be a really important potential economic growth sector for India.
And in your view, as an author, what ethical trends should we watch for in the metaverse, so-called, such as data privacy in virtual realities or AI biases in immersive environments to ensure equitable access and prevent societal harms?
Look, this is a really important question. And so the answer is, we know that there are a whole slew of ethical questions, some of which we have only just started to unravel. And so, you talked about identity, you talk about privacy, you talk about children, how we protect children in the metaverse, you talk about bias, so we're not discriminating against certain groups. So there's a whole lot of things that we're going to need to figure out. There's for example, if you commit a crime in the metaverse, what happens? Are you going to be prosecuted in the same way as you'd be prosecuted in the real world? So the first thing is, we have many, many, many ethical issues. And the other thing is, in the metaverse, they're capturing more information about you than has ever been captured before, because they're capturing your psychological reactions, your physiological reactions, you're connected to IoTs and so forth. So there's a whole lot of issues around data. But one of the points that I would like to make, and I think is really important, is we're not going to solve that problem. We're not going to protect people through the traditional means of having committees, having policies, having structures and so forth. Because we're moving into a digital environment, the only way we're going to be able to govern it properly and protect people against ethical challenges is that it needs to be encoded in the platforms. And so what this is going to mean is an incredible amount of collaboration between government, between industry and the communities to make sure that built into these platforms are those kinds of safeguards that need to be there, and with the ethical considerations to protect people against bias and data misuse and so forth.
And looking to 2030, what bold trends do you predict at the intersection of AI, Web3 and gaming, such as hyper-realistic simulations or cross-platform in interoperability, and how can businesses and individuals adapt to thrive in these virtual frontiers?
Well, I think the first thing that we need to remember is that the generation coming forward have grown up with a screen in front of their face. So they're very comfortable in these immersive environments. So they'll be very comfortable working in them, getting skills in them, using them. They're very comfortable with digital assets. They're very comfortable with avatars. So we need to think about the world that they're going to be comfortable living in and where the opportunities are to earn income. And, you know, you talk about AI and gaming. What we're seeing now is already games are being written by the players, particularly the Web3 games. So it's no longer the big companies who design a game and give it to you and you play it, but they've actually got cooperation and collaboration of people together with AI actually designing the future of games. And then with digital assets entering the gaming, it means that people can really transfer value from one game to another, in and out of games, back into the real world. So it's going to be a whole growth economy that everyone needs to take seriously.
And AI-generated content has already influenced elections. It's spread deepfake propaganda and manipulated public opinion in some circumstances, with regulation still lagging behind in innovation. In a world where AI can influence opinions, behavior, and how they vote, who decides what is ethical to tech companies, governments, or the public?
That's a complicated question to answer, because let me say this. First of all, ethics is not consistent across cultures. So what might be ethical in a Western democracy might not be ethical in a communist country, for example. And so every country is going to have a different view about ethics. But at the same time, these platforms operate multi-jurisdictionally. So you're not going to be able to go, well, this is the rules in this country and I'm only going to stick to that, because people can go and operate on the platforms in other jurisdictions. So there's going to need to be some sort of cross-jurisdictional collaboration about some very, very basic requirements that get built into the platforms. That's the A. The B is you're always going to have bad actors, and you're always going to have people whose intent is to do harm or to cause trouble. And to some extent, I think that what we're going to start to see is a little bit like at the movies. You go to an R-rated movie or an M-rated movie or a G-rated movie, there's going to be some form of rating of the platforms around data security and ethics and all of these other issues. But the point that you make is absolutely correct. The technology is moving faster than the regulation, and it always does. And so moving forward, but in a digital way, and that's why I made the point, this has all got to be hard-coded in. It can't be we've written a policy and we've put it on a website. That won't work, because unless it's on the platform and it controls the way the platform is operating, it's not going to be effective. So we need a whole new form of governance for this future immersive AI-enabled Web3 world.
And finally, of course, from smartphones to AI assistants, every major tech shift has reshaped how humans think, work, and even form relationships in some circumstances. Do you think we're shaping technology, or is technology now shaping us going forward?
Well, we need to get back in front. So I think the answer is technology's taken away in front of us, and we need to have the kind of people who understand technology helping governments and people who are building these kinds of governance arrangements to understand what we need to control and how we need to protect people and how we need to make it better. And what are the kinds of platforms and opportunities that we want to put in front of people? So let's just say, I mean, health and education are perfect examples. You know, we can really transform, particularly in emerging economies, how health and education are provided, because all you basically need is a mobile phone and then connection to one of these platforms, and you're going to really be able to bring people both health and education services, connection to the economy that they've never had before. So it's so powerful and it's so promising, but we can't do it with no controls or no safeguards. And I think that's where the conversation needs to be. And the safeguards need to be put in place by people who understand the technology, which is why the collaboration with the tech companies is absolutely essential.
Dr. Jane Thomason, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us. It was a pleasure to speak to you here on Trending Tech.
Thanks for having me.
With that, that's all we have time for. Do stay updated on NewsX World and Trending Tech for updates and innovations.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain.
Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's dive into the top headlines this hour. The US Justice Department releases 3 million pages, 180,000 images and 2,000 videos linked to Jeffrey Epstein. The release comes after a missed legal deadline, with officials saying it ends a major review to ensure transparency. The US government enters a partial shutdown after Congress fails to pass a 2026 budget. Lawmakers signal a quick fix as the House moves to ratify a Senate-backed deal next week. The US Chief of Mission for Venezuela is set to arrive in Caracas as the government proposes a broad amnesty law. Acting President Delcy Rodriguez says the bill could free hundreds of prisoner detainees and transform a notorious prison. Iran says it is ready for fair and equitable talks with the US as regional tensions continue to rise. President Trump refuses to rule out military action, while Tehran says negotiations cannot occur under threats. Washington approves $6.67 billion in arms sales to Israel amid a fragile Gaza ceasefire. The package includes 30 Apache helicopters and infantry assault vehicles, according to the State Department. More than 200 people are killed in a collapse at the Rabaya coltan mine in eastern DRC. The site produces about 15% of the world's coltan and has been under M23 rebel control since 2024. The United Nations warns it could run out of money by July as member states fail to pay their fees. The warning comes after the United States withholds funding and other countries fall into arrears. China conducts naval and air patrols around the Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea. The feature is claimed by Beijing but lies within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. Those are the headlines, and now our top story this hour. Newly released files from the federal investigation into Jeffrey Epstein include 74 documents referring comments made by US President Donald Trump about the late sex offender. In 2002 New York magazine profile, Trump called Epstein a lot of fun to be with and praised him as a terrific guy, even commenting on Epstein's appreciation for beautiful women, including younger ones. These remarks, made during a long-time friendship between Trump and Epstein, are mentioned repeatedly in the documents as prosecutors dig into Epstein and his accomplice Ghislaine Maxwell's activities. The files also include a friendly email sent to Maxwell in October of 2002, signed Love Melania. The email, sent just days after a flattering New York magazine profile of Epstein, refers to a photo of Maxwell and Epstein and discusses plans to meet up in New York. Maxwell replied, saying her plans had changed, but she would try to call. Just over 2 weeks later, Melania Trump and Maxwell were photographed together in New York with President Trump and Naomi Campbell. Meanwhile, the documents also show that Epstein proposed introducing a Russian woman to Andrew Mountbatten Windsor in 2010, formerly Prince Andrew. In an interview, Epstein told Andrew he had a friend who would be in London and might enjoy having dinner with him. Andrew asked whether she would be bringing a message from Epstein, and the two discussed a possible meeting. Later, Epstein contacted Andrew about a dinner at Buckingham Palace. There's no evidence the meeting ever occurred. Joining us now to discuss this is Professor Veselin Popovsky, Professor and Vice Dean at Jindal Global Law School. He joins us live from Thailand. Thank you very much for joining us. Of course, it's always a pleasure. This new DOJ release shows previously unseen emails, including elites and Epstein, including for Donald Trump, saying that Epstein was a lot of fun to be with, and a 2002 email signed Love Melania. What do you think we should make of these revelations about these personal communications?
Well, they show a very close relationship between Donald Trump and Melania Trump at the time with the sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Obviously, it was known before that such relationship did exist. Now we simply have much more documents and more notorious and more disturbing revelations. And on one hand, it shows transparency, and the DOJ here acts in the spirit of democracy, transparency. Everybody should know the truth. And this is a good news in a way that transparency is necessary for American people, for every other people in the world to know who was connected to Jeffrey Epstein. And the damage is there already. Now, how much that will produce further damage, that's the good question, how Donald Trump will respond. Usually he denies everything, and he tries to avoid the topic, and he will blame other people. In the files, we see other names. Yes, the ex-Prince Andrew, Bill Clinton, Elon Musk appears very often this time. And this is the usual tactics that Donald Trump will employ to deny and to blame others rather than himself. But yes, for every intelligent observer, it's very clear that Trump was part of the ring of those sex offenses, revelations that they engaged in orgies, and by the way, not only in the villa in Epstein Island, but also in other places in Mago del Lago, and there was a contest for calendar girls, and girls as young as 13 have been trafficked to Trump's residence in Florida, and all of this needs answers, and hopefully one day we will have more answers. But yes, I suspect Trump will deny, he will avoid responsibility here, he will basically ignore that evidence. Now it depends how strong the reaction to those will be from the American public, from the Democrats, obviously, but even some Republicans need also to ask those questions. What person, so I have a question to the Republican Party. What person do they support as their leader, as their president? And that every single Republican senator or congressman need to answer. Seeing those files, what do Republicans think? That's my question. And going to the elections in November, that question should come more frequently.
Of course, Professor Popovsky, it is clear that there was a close relationship, given the style of language and the sign-offs, etc. However, how serious should journalists and investigators treat these documents, given the DOJ's warning that some material may be unverified or sensational?
Well, that's exactly the investigation is needed as to verify what happened. Every investigation should go deeper and deeper. Official investigations, criminal investigation, journalistic investigation should go and ask those questions. They should be corroborating evidence. There could be interviews. People can be invited to talk under anonymity if necessary. But yes, more we know, better. That's the task of the media, the task of the public, the civil society. Everybody needs those answers. What type of president did we elect? Every American should ask that question. More knowledge, more transparency, obviously better. And if something proved to be wrong, that's also good. Let's find out what is right, what is wrong, what is correct, what is false. That's exactly the purpose of every investigation. So we should encourage investigations.
Okay, do stay with us as we move on to our next story. And the US is taking steps towards reopening its embassy in Caracas after more than 6 years of severed diplomatic relations with Venezuela. According to sources, the US chief of mission will arrive in Caracas on Saturday. This marks the beginning of a phased plan to re-establish a US presence in Venezuela. The first phase involves sending a small team of temporary staff to the capital, where they will carry out essential functions like security and management. The team will work from a temporary facility while the embassy compound is upgraded. The goal is to eventually expand their duties to include consular, political and economic work. Professor Popovsky joins us once again. This, of course, comes after the capture of Nicolas Maduro, which occurred on the 3rd of this month. Delcy Rodriguez is now taking charge as interim president of Venezuela, a person which Donald Trump has said that negotiations and have been going well. How significant is this move for the future of the relations that the United States is opening its embassy there?
I think that we see clearly a normalization, which is excellent. By the way, a lot of people were predicting almost like a civil war in Venezuela, almost like a regional war, almost world war, after the arrest of Maduro. Nothing of that happened. Good news, the amnesty and the release of hundreds of political prisoners being kept in torturous conditions is a very good news. It shows also goodwill of the Delcy Rodriguez, the former vice president. Obviously, initially, she condemned the attack and she said that Maduro needs to be released, but that's an obvious first courteous reaction. And after that, she is in power and she takes good steps. She establishes relationship with United States. The amnesty follows. Her brother, by the way, is the Speaker of the National Assembly in Venezuela here. The law of amnesty comes. I see normalization here, despite all the, doomsayers who are thinking things in Venezuela will go from bad to worse. Nothing like that. We might even see elections at one point. Why not? With Maria Machado also being invited to the White House, the relationship between both the opposition leader and the current president looks good. So I'm optimistic here. Venezuela and the people of Venezuela should celebrate the end of Maduro. They should stop even thinking about Maduro and looking into the future, expecting normalization and possible elections. Like every other Latin American country went through difficult past, but at some point it gained its democracy, human rights, rule of law.
Where do you think the plans that Donald Trump, of course, floated, that the United States is going to run Venezuela, fits in to this whole development?
Oh, he likes to run. He likes to be the leader of everything. He wants to be the leader of Gaza, the leader of the world, the Nobel Peace and all that. That's Donald Trump. But yes, Venezuela is a sovereign country. It has its own parliament, the National Assembly. It has its own president, current. I don't think President Trump, he can influence. He can put some demands and some conditions to Delcy Rodriguez, obviously. He does this to everybody else, every other leader in the world. But over time, I hope at least that the people of Venezuela will make that decisions. Then they should say, we don't want the Americans here. We are sovereign people. We are sovereign country. And that's the future. Trump says a lot of things, but 90% of those do not happen. He talked about Greenland. He talked in the first term about the wall with Mexico, and the Mexico will pay for that. None of those happens. Again, Donald Trump likes to talk and to be seen as a great leader, but nothing of this happens. In a sense, interestingly, ironically, the removal of Maduro can be seen as possibly the only beneficial action of this president so far, because yes, that opens the door, as I mentioned, for some positive change in Venezuela itself, maybe new elections and normalization and all of that. So the removal of Maduro, which was, by the way, planned already for a long time, for months, and apparently also happened with the help of some internal people, including possibly in the government. Some even conspiratorially say Delcy Rodriguez might have known about that. We have absolutely no proof or verification, but generally the more time goes, I think there is a more justification for the removal of Maduro from power. If that brings liberty and prosperity back to Venezuela, by the way, used to be the most prosperous Latin American country, and Maduro turned it the most miserable one. Yeah. So it might work, although it's a violation of international law. I'm not saying anything different, but it might turn, that this violation of international law might turn into something positive long term.
Okay, Professor Popovsky, thank you very much, as always, for talking to us. It's always a pleasure. to get your insights on these issues. We now move on to a related development, and Venezuela has slammed the United States for imposing what it calls punitive measures against Cuba. This comes after the US issued threats to impose tariffs on countries continuing to supply oil to Cuba. Venezuela's foreign ministry condemned the action, stating that the tariff order signed by US President Donald Trump targets countries maintaining legitimate trade relations with Havana. The Venezuelan government is calling for collective international action, urging countries to address the growing humanitarian consequences of these US actions, which they claim are hurting Cuba's ability to survive economically. Now we turn to North Africa, and Tunisian President Kais Saied has extended the state of emergency in Tunisia for another 11 months, now lasting until December the 31st of 2026. The state of emergency has been in place since 2015 following an attack that killed several presidential guards. This decision was published in the official Gazette on January the 30th, and despite protests from activists and political opponents calling for a return to democracy, the state of emergency continues as part of Saied's ongoing policies. Meanwhile, this extension marks the continuation of Tunisia's heightened security measures. Major General Dr. Rajan Kochar joins us now. He's an international relations expert, joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much for joining us. Tunisia has extended a long-standing state of emergency now until the end of this year, almost 11 years after it was first imposed. What does this prolonged emergency law signal about Tunisia's political trajectory?
Thank you, Thomas. This Tunisia, if you see its location also, it's a part of the MENA, is Middle East, North Africa, as it's called, and it's at the tip of North Africa and next to the Mediterranean Sea, and bordering Libya. So if you look at it in that context, since 2021, we have seen President Saied, he has suspended and later he dissolved the parliament. It is ruled largely by decree, and it has a weakened judicial independence. And this has been a very long period where this state is being actually run by emergency. And any country which runs its affairs in a dictatorial manner, disregarding democracy and the way we have seen Tunisia. And terrorism is not that much there. You see, though there are residual jihadi elements near the Algerian and the Libyan borders, and the spillover is always there, but it has not destabilized that thing, because it's not largely a state where terrorism problems have been there. Some attacks have happened where this, on the pretext of that, this emergency was declared a long time back. But what I think that there is a larger problem. One is the civil liberties has been severely curtailed in this region. There is a freedom of expression, a freedom of assembly, and the press also has been largely controlled by this government. And apart from that, apart from the weakened parliamentary role and etc., Tunisia has a very large scale of unemployment. And when you have this kind of unemployment, almost 35%, you'll be surprised. And when you have this kind of unemployment and you have poverty, when money is not available, when the food security is a problem, then you find that people do come onto the streets. And there will be law and order issues when people are dissatisfied. But there doesn't seem to be a way out for them as far as this administration is concerned, because rule of law is not there as such. So they try to implement the policies. You know, an emergency, when the emergency
Yes.
powers are, you can arrest anybody and you without a judicial review. So that's a very unfortunate situation where we talk about democracy and things like this. But Tunisia is in a very, very precarious position as of now.
And how do states justify continuing emergency powers long after threat has received it? 11 years in this case, and what are the risks for democratic governance?
You see, as long as you are not going to have a democratic governance, Tunisia will have a problem in receiving funds from the IMF also. And then it adds on to the worries of the people. You know, my only worry is that whenever, if you actually study situations of a civil war, when things come to this kind of an extent, then what happens is that a probability of a civil war also emerges, because the power centralization in the hands of one man, and we have seen today how the countries which are ruled by dictators are slowly collapsing. Libya is another example right in the neighborhood, and Syria also we have seen similar kind of problems. So this suggests that if Tunisia does not bring, or it does not remove emergency, and if it slowly tries to bring in a governance by the people, of the people, and for the people, and if it does not do that, I'm very skeptical that in times to come it may lead to a situation of a civil war.
Dr. Kochhar, as always, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us. We turn now over to the Pacific, and the death toll from a landslide in Indonesia's West Java province has risen to 49. Rescue officials say 15 people are still missing, a week after heavy rains triggered the disaster in Pasir Langgu village near Bandung. The emergency response has now been extended by 7 days through to February the 6th. The landslide follows a series of deadly weather events, including floods and landslides in Sumatra last year that killed more than 1,200 people and displaced over 1 million. The update comes as Indonesia's rescue agency faces budget cuts, raising concerns over disaster preparedness. Now, according to the China Southern Theatre Command, China conducted naval and air patrols around the Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea. The shoal is in the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, but China also claims it as part of its territory. China has increased combat readiness patrols in the area this month, countering what it calls infringing provocations from certain countries. This comes after the Philippines and the US conducted joint military exercises in the area earlier this week, marking the 11th such drill since November of 2023. Well, that's all that we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome. I am Ellie Richardson and you are watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. The US Justice Department releases 3 million pages, 180,000 images and 2,000 videos linked to Jeffrey Epstein. The release comes after a missed legal deadline, with officials saying it ends a major review to ensure transparency. Iran says it is ready for fair and equitable talks with the United States as regional tensions continue to rise. President Donald Trump refuses to rule out military action, while Tehran says negotiations cannot occur under threats. Thousands protest in Minneapolis and students walk out nationwide demanding federal immigration agents leave Minnesota. The action follows fatal shootings and comes as the Trump administration signals mixed messages on de-escalation. Washington approves $6.67 billion in arms sales to Israel amid fragile Gaza ceasefire. The package includes 30 Apache attack helicopters and infantry assault vehicles, according to the State of Department. More than 200 people are killed in a collapse at the Rabaya coltan mine in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. The site produces about 15% of the world's coltan and has been under M23 rebel control since 2024. The United Nations warn it could run out of money by July as member states fail to pay their fees. The warning comes after the United States withholds funding and other countries fall into areas. Acting President Delcy Rodriguez announces an amnesty bill that could free hundreds of political detainees. The ruling party-led assembly is set to fast-track the measure. China conducts naval and air patrols around Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea. The feature is claimed by Beijing but lies within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. And for your top story this hour, newly released Jeffrey Epstein files include a reference to acclaimed filmmaker Mira Nair, the mother of New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani, in a 2009 email sent to the late financier by publicist Peggy Segal. The email, which appears in a fresh tranche of documents released by the US Department of Justice, describes Segal leaving an after-party at the Manhattan townhouse of Ghislaine Maxwell following an event tied to Nair's 2009 film Amelia. The email goes on to comment on the reception of Amelia, writing that the film received a tepid reaction, before describing other industry events Segal planned to attend. The message was one of hundreds of thousands of documents unsealed as part of the Justice Department's latest disclosure related to Epstein's crimes and his interactions with prominent figures. We are now being joined by Ross Fingold in Taiwan, who is a political analyst. Thank you so much for joining us here today on NewsX World. So after these release of over 3 million pages of these Epstein files, what does the mention of Mira Nair in these newly released Epstein files actually tell us? And most importantly, what doesn't it tell us?
First, congratulations on joining NewsX. Yeah, as far as this release of additional files, it's going to be negative publicity for some of the prominent people who are mentioned. It doesn't matter who it is, whether it's a politician or a business person or people who span the worlds of business and politics, whose name appears, like Commerce Secretary Lutnick or X's Elon Musk. Or relatives of politicians. From the perspective of were powerful people friendly, or famous people friendly with with Jeffrey Epstein and interacted with him and continued to attend events with him or seek his counsel or financial support after his first conviction way back in 2008. We knew that was the case. Now we have a few more names and evidence that people who could have easily checked whether or not Epstein had a criminal record, they didn't bother to check, or if they knew, they ignored it. So for any of the prominent people whose name appears in the latest release, there will be some negative publicity and say, why were you still interacting with someone as despicable as this, even after he pled guilty to a crime back in 2008? But does it really indicate that these people were involved in criminal activity themselves? Of course it doesn't. So there'll be negative publicity, but I would expect all the prominent people whose names have appeared will probably survive this release of their names.
And does the political connection that Mira Nair is the mother of New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani change how these files are being perceived and discussed in the public sphere?
I think it just confirms for the public that Epstein had a very wide social network, people from different walks of life, whether the arts or academia. I mean, clearly he had a very close relationship with a number of academic institutions, including Harvard, among others, very prominent, obviously, academic institutions. Politicians, both in the United States as well as from outside the United States. So he had this very wide social network of prominent people. And again, it's going to be a negative for any of them, no matter who they are. As far as Mayor Mamdani goes, I mean, he literally just began his term a few weeks ago. So there's nearly 4 more years of Mayor Mamdani. There's nearly 4 more years of opportunities for him to demonstrate that he's an effective mayor, or for him to demonstrate that he was a bad choice by the voters. There's going to be a lot more issues, positive or negative, for Mayor Mamdani than this. So I don't think the public in New York City is going to hold this against him personally.
And obviously there's been names and names released as these files are also being released to the public. Should names from old social events be reported differently to names that are linked to clear allegations?
Generally speaking, the approach from judicial agencies in the United States, prosecutors, is typically not to release this information, but politics and the law that Congress passed last year forced their hand. But when this kind of information is typically released, the normal practice is to redact the names of people who were not actually accused of a crime. And frankly, that's why this information is typically not even released to the public to begin with, because people might be investigated or their names might appear in an accusation, and that is contained in the files that prosecutors or police will collect. But it could be completely false, or the behavior might be untoward and inappropriate, but not necessarily a crime. Typically this info isn't released. When it is, normally the authorities would redact the names of people who were not charged with a crime. But the reality in this situation is the names of many prominent people have been released or through these multiple tranches of documents that have been made public. There are other people who we've known for many years associated with Jeffrey Epstein. So at this point, it almost looks silly to say, well, we can't release the names of people who attended a social event with him, because again, we already know so many names anyway. Epstein was such an active person on the social scene, whether in New York City or Florida or elsewhere. So at this point, I would say hiding names of people who attended events with him, it looks kind of silly because so much information has already been released already.
And you just touched on it there, that so many people do go to these social gatherings that he's held, and he was a very prominent figure. But do you think, does the constant focus on who attended past Epstein-linked gatherings distract the accountability for the actual crimes?
Unfortunately, Epstein did not really face accountability for his crimes, other than that one plea agreement he reached about 18 years ago, which most people now believe was what in American legalese we would call a sweetheart deal. He got a really good deal from the prosecutors, very light punishment for soliciting prostitution, and he was arrested and facing more serious charges in 2019 when he committed suicide in jail. So Epstein himself barely faced any accountability, and for many of the other individuals who associated with him, it seems like authorities don't have enough to prosecute them, other than Maxwell, who is currently in jail, and she was convicted, and her convictions were upheld on appeal for facilitating the trafficking of underage women for Epstein. But all these other prominent people, up to now, it seems that it was distasteful and foolish that they associated with someone who, especially after he was already convicted of a crime, and they continued to do so for many years. But again, it appears, at least as of now, that these other prominent people have not engaged in any criminal behavior.
Thank you, Ross, for joining us, but don't go too far. We'll be back with you later. US President Donald Trump says Iran wants a deal rather than face US military action. He warned Tehran that time is running out on nuclear negotiations as a large US naval fleet gathers in the Gulf. Iran insists its missile and defense systems are non-negotiable and maintains its nuclear program is peaceful. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says talks are possible if based on mutual respect and trust. Trump says the US Armada will remain in the region and stressed negotiations are ongoing, while Iranian protests continue with thousands reported killed in recent unrest. Listen in to what the US President Donald Trump had to say.
They were going to hang 837 people, and I told them, if you do it, you're going to pay a price like nobody's ever paid before. And they pulled back. I appreciated that. But a lot of people are being killed, so we'll see what happens. I can say this, they do want to make a deal.
We are now being joined by Ross Feingold again. Thank you so much for joining us back here. If Trump says Iran does want to make a deal, how much of that reflects genuine Iranian willingness versus US strategic messaging with military pressure?
At the moment, it's difficult to see what the deal would be. The United States and many other countries, frankly, they want or demand that Iran give up its nuclear research program. Iran says it's civilian and peaceful, and nobody believes them. It's clear that this program is designed to research and develop nuclear weapons. And that's why the United States joined Israel in bombing the Iranian nuclear facilities last year. So on that issue alone, there's clearly a huge gap between what Iran is willing to do and what the United States wants. Similarly, the issue is with its missile program as well. Iran has developed missiles that are not for its defense, but are actually for offensive purposes, and they've used those to attack Israel. And it's been a longstanding demand of the United States and its closest allies that Iran also give up that program. So those two issues alone show that there's a huge gap between the expectations of the United States and Iran. What's interesting here is whether or not the position of President Trump is that the current leadership needs to go, or is President Trump saying, if we could reach a deal on your missile program, if we could reach a deal on your nuclear program, I don't care if you continue to run the country as a dictatorship, as this religious dictatorship. That part is a little bit unclear. We have the obvious recent example in Venezuela where the United States did forcibly remove the president of the country. On the other hand, the United States left Maduro's team in control of Venezuela for now. So one of the key things here that, frankly, at the moment is still a little bit unclear is, does the United States, does the Trump administration seek a regime change in Iran, or does it not?
And does linking a deal to Iran's nuclear program and protests make an agreement harder or easier?
Well, it probably makes it harder. It seems at the moment that despite the demands of the United States and its partners, including Europeans or the Gulf countries, that Iran bring to an end this nuclear program. For the current regime in Iran, this seems to be something they insist on continuing to do. And as long as they continue to insist on their nuclear program, then there is a risk not just of continued sanctions, but possibly additional military action, whether by Israel, the United States, or both of them working together. So as long as this regime stays in control, it seems that they will continue their nuclear program. I think that is a terribly stupid mistake on their part. They're hurting their own people because of the international sanctions that have been imposed on Iran over this issue. But again, as long as they stay in power, it seems that they think they need to have nuclear weapons, and they will pay the price, because if the United States and Israel come to believe that Iran is continuing to research and develop nuclear weapons, they will strike again.
And is Trump's claim that Iran wants a deal meant to open talks or increase pressure?
I think it's fair to say that Trump is willing to make a deal. Again, it's not clear if he wants the regime to go away or if he's agreeable to the regime staying in power as long as they give up their missile and nuclear weapons development programs. If it is the latter, if Trump is saying, I don't mind if the regime stays in power, but they need to give up the nuclear and missile research and development programs, then that's a huge opportunity for the regime, because it basically is opening a path where they can remain in power, and not just remain in power, but also really return to some level of normal interactions with the international community. So just for example, if the regime was to say today, we are giving up our nuclear program, or giving up our offensive missile program, we'll limit our research to defensive needs only, and we're willing to have international inspectors and transparency about this, then a number of countries will remove sanctions. The United States might also remove sanctions as well. So again, to be fair to President Trump, it does seem at the moment he's willing to make a deal, which might include letting the regime stay in power.
And talking of fair, Tehran insists negotiations must be fair and trustworthy between each of them, and not under threat. But the US is still building up their military forces. How tough for these conditions meeting each other?
Well, the Iranian regime is just not being realistic here, because there's a key point, which is if they continue to develop the nuclear weapons program, the United States and possibly Israel as well will use military force. And that's one of the reasons why President Trump has surged military assets nearby to Iran, because of the possibility that he will order the use of military force. This is not about having an equal or a fair negotiation, and that's just the reality of the situation. The United States is a major military power. Iran is dangerous, but they can't compete with the military power of the United States, and Israel potentially brings additional military power to the equation as well. So again, there seems to be a path for the Iranian regime to remain in power if they give up the missile program, give up the nuclear program, stop slaughtering their own people. And they're just being very, very foolish, as they have been for decades, with so many stupid decisions they made over the years to support terrorist groups around the region and try to develop nuclear weapons. So they have a chance here. President Trump is offering them a chance, and it's up to them to take it.
Thank you so much, Ross Feingold, for joining us here on NewsX World today. US President Donald Trump has endorsed Kevin Warsh as his pick for the next Federal Reserve chairman, highlighting Warsh's strong stance on lowering interest rates. Trump emphasized that Warsh is eager to reduce rates, a position Trump has long advocated. While Warsh supports the Fed's independence, he has also been outspoken in criticizing current Fed leadership and its approach to inflation. arguing that its policies are outdated and hinder economic growth. Walsh's approach could signal a shift towards a more pro-growth, lower-rate strategy. Trump also said he is not worried about Walsh's confirmation and mentioned that he will likely discuss rate cuts with him. I am now being joined by Dr. Ajay Dua, who is a senior economist joining us from Singapore. Thank you so much for joining us here on NewsX World today. Could Trump's comments about rate cuts put pressure on the Federal Reserve and affect its independence?
Thank you for having me in the discussion, Valerie. I'm sure that President Trump is confident that his nominee, Kevin Walsh, would be able to get a confirmation from the Senate. That is why he's got him going immediately to start holding discussions on what appears to be Mr. Trump's highest priority, that is the interest rates fixed by the Federal Bank. But find that as it is, he comes, let me just be a little personal there, that Mr. Walsh comes from a family of billionaires. He is related to the Estee Lauder family. We all know about the Lauders. So he can be expected to believe in lower soft interest rates, something which President Trump believes in. So that the choice was probably also his choice over others was probably influenced by this factor. But can the President of the United States do it through just having the chairman of his choice? So in that context, I like to just mention that there is a the Fed's appointed Committee for Monetary Policy, which consists of 12 members. The last, and that means all the governors who are there are members plus some experts. The decision taken 3 days ago when it was decided not to further lower the interest rates in the economy was by this committee, and the voting pattern there was 10 people endorsing that there is no need for further cuts, while 2 voted for it. The majority prevails. So unless this system, and it's not a decision of the US administration, but it is a decision of the Fed, the bank itself. So unless they are ready to change the decision of how to arrive at a well thought out way of fixing the rates of interest, one man, even if he or she happens to be the chairman of the Fed, probably cannot on his own change the effect, bring about the lower interest rates which President Trump is talking about. So I'm a little perplexed. He can influence it. He's, after all, the chairman. He can be talking to the other governors, etc. And the other governors may toe his line. He can be talking to experts. He can be influencing the country's decision-making process by talking about, or the demands of the country by talking freely to the press, etc. All that is possible, but it certainly is not going to be a one-man show.
And could these public comments influence markets even before Walsh is officially confirmed?
I hope not. The markets are run by people who are very knowledgeable, far more knowledgeable than you and me, because they see the market functioning, how it gets, historically, how it has got influenced by the Fed's decisions, how it's got influenced by such announcements about the proclivities of the chairman. I think the market will take note of it, but it is not going to get in any way impacted by it merely because the president has appointed a person who may be willing to suggest a lowering of rates and who probably could also, to an extent, compromise. I'm making a very tall comment or a material comment, who may be willing to compromise the independence of the Fed Bank, which is certainly not what the market is going to relish.
And could Walsh's expected support for rate cuts help Trump's economic agenda or undermine Fed credibility?
I think having lower interest rates certainly is desirable, but it does mean that you are lowering the interest rates for a purpose. That means to be there greater borrowing of money from the institutions and down the line from the non-banking financial institution companies and others. But is that the situation currently? The inflation in the US economy, which was a real threat when President Trump started demanding of Mr. Powell and others to lower the rate at that point of time, and it was also, employment had become an issue. The unemployment figures were not favorable. But what did that lead to? 3 consecutive rate cuts, quarterly rate cuts by the Fed under Mr. Powell. But the fact that it was said a few days ago when the last review took place by Powell and the governors who attended the press conference or who had attended the press conference, saying that things are no longer so bad. The unemployment data is steady, not increasing, and also in the economy we are finding that it is no longer kind of inflation is not increasing. There has been a check on it, and that we would like to revisit the issue in our next meeting, which is only in the month of June, by when probably Mr. Powell may not be there because his term ends in May. So I do think that whether it's good for the economy, desirable or not, it is too early to talk about it. What happens in the next 5 months, what Mr. Trump continues to do with the tariffs, what he continues to do geopolitically, how coordinated his actions are, how much of support he gets from the rest of the world, from his allies, etc., all will determine whether rate cut by itself is adequate to spur the economy.
Thank you so much for joining us here today, Dr. Ajay Dua. The US State Department has approved a potential $9 billion sale of Patriot missiles and related equipment to Saudi Arabia. The deal includes 730 PAC-3 MSC missiles designed to enhance Saudi Arabia's missile defense systems amid growing regional tensions. Lockheed Martin will be the principal contractor providing the advanced missile systems. The Pentagon confirmed that this sale will not alter the military balance in the Middle East and will not negatively impact the US defense readiness. This approval comes after Saudi Arabia's request to bolster its defense infrastructure, ensuring greater security against missile threats. The deal is also aimed at reinforcing US-Saudi defense relations. A mine collapse in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo has killed more than 200 people. The disaster occurred Wednesday at the Rubaya Coltan mine, which has been controlled by the M23 rebel group since 2024. Rubaya produces about 15% of the world's coltan, a key metal used in mobile phones, computers, aerospace components, and gas turbines. Victims include minors, children, and market women, while dozens were reduced with serious injuries. An advisor to the governor confirmed at least 227 deaths, though the toll may rise. The UN says M23 has plundered the mine to fund its insurgency, allegations Rwanda denies. The rebels captured more mineral-rich territory last year, claiming to protect the Tutsi minority. Google has won a legal battle over user data collection. A federal judge in San Francisco rejected a bid by consumers seeking more than $2 billion in penalties. The case stems from allegations that Google collected app activity data from millions of users who had turned off key privacy settings. A September jury verdict had already warned $425 million in damages and advised that additional penalties were underwarranted. Judge Richard Seaborg also denied Google's request to decredify the class of 98 million users and 174 million devices. Google says it will appeal the verdict, while plaintiffs argue the company's privacy practices remain unchanged. That's all we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
Hello and welcome. I am Ellie Richardson and you are watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. The US Justice Department releases 3 million pages, 180,000 images and 2,000 videos linked to Jeffrey Epstein. The release comes after a missed legal deadline, with officials saying it ends a major review to ensure transparency. The US government enters a partial shutdown after Congress fails to pass a 2026 budget. Lawmakers signal a quick fix as the House moves to ratify a Senate-backed deal next week. According to a statement by the Danish Foreign Ministry, Denmark will reopen its embassy in Damascus after a 14-year closure, with Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen saying embassy will resume operations to better monitor developments and boost cooperation with Syria. The US Chief of Mission for Venezuela is set to arrive in Caracas as the government proposes a broad amnesty law. Acting President Delcy Rodriguez says the bill could free hundreds of political detainees and transform a notorious prison. Iran says it is ready for a fair and equitable talks with the United States as regional tensions continue to rise. President Donald Trump refuses to rule out military action, while Tehran says negotiations cannot occur under threats. Washington approves $6.67 billion in arms sales to Israel amid a fragile Gaza ceasefire. The package includes 30 Apache attack helicopters and infantry assault vehicles, according to the State Department. According to local officials, at least 20 people were killed after heavy rains triggered devastating landslides at a mine in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, which is controlled by M23 rebels, while authorities warned the toll could rise as rescue operations continue. According to international media reports, Guinea-Bissau opposition leader Domingos Simões was released from jail on Friday after months in detention following the November military coup that ousted President Umaro Sissoko just days after presidential election. And for your top story this hour, the US Justice Department has released over 180,000 new documents, including files, images, and over 2,000 new videos, totaling up to some 3.5 million responsive pages of documents relating to the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. The Department of Justice has stated that over 500 attorneys have been involved with the vetting process, and the release includes, quote, untrue and sensationalist claims about President Donald Trump. This rider to this latest release is causing some controversy, particularly since the Justice Department's preface to release doubles down on this claim, stating outrightly that the claims are unfounded and false, and if they have a shred of credibility, they certainly would have been weaponized against President Trump already. The outrage to this is quite strong, with the authors of the Epstein Transparency Act, Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie, demanding to see unredacted versions of the documents involving Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. In a letter to Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, they requested a meeting to review files they say are overly redacted. Khanna and Massie want to access to hundreds of thousands of pages, including emails, victim interviews, and key investigation documents. They argue that current redactions limit oversight and public accountability. The lawmakers seek to review these files in person, hoping to understand the full scope of the government's actions in the case. The outrage to this is quite strong, with the authors of the Epstein Transparency Act, Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie, demanding to see unredacted versions of the documents involving Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. In a letter to Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, they requested a meeting to review files they say are overly redacted. Khanna and Massie want access to hundreds of thousands of pages, including emails, victim interviews, and key investigation documents. They argue that current redactions limit oversight and public accountability, and the lawmakers seek to review these files in person, hoping to understand the full scope of the government's actions in the case. We are now being joined by Alison Mutler in Romania, who's the former AP Bureau Chief. Thank you so much for joining us here today on NewsX World. If the Justice Department says the files contain fake and untrue pieces of information, all of these claims, does that justify withholding parts of the Epstein files, or does it undermine transparency?
Well, it's an absolute mess. I mean, the people that want transparency should have access to these files, but then you have to say determine how much is fake in these files and who determines that, and how much is real. And then after that, it's who else has access to them. Are they given to the public? If they're given to the public, are they redacted to protect victims and other things which are not legal wrongdoing? So it's very, very complicated, but more than complicated, it's an absolute mess. There has been a lot of pressure, political pressure, I suppose public pressure for these files to be opened, and they are being made public. We now have another tranche of, I think you said, 3 million pages, but it's still not the whole picture. And the people who are behind pushing for this transparency want to see everything without the redactions. That doesn't mean, and redactions means just obscuring all the details. That doesn't mean that the public will have access to them. But the people who are behind this move, they do want to see the original documents. That said, if there is false information in those files, who determines that? It's quite a mess, and I don't think we're ever going to have any satisfactory answers. We have had more transparency than we did a few months ago, and files have been open and made public, but then it's up to the public to decide, what to make of these files, whether wrongdoing happened or whether it's just a huge embarrassment to very powerful people like Prince Andrew and other people who are mentioned in the files, like Mandelson, he's a British politician, and also Bill Gates. And how much actual legal wrongdoing, and if there is a legal wrongdoing, what happens after that? Does the Department of Justice pursue justice in these cases? There are a lot of unanswered questions here, and of course, what to do with these files and who can see them.
Yeah, 100%. And we've obviously heard that this took a while to come out. These files were meant to be shown public quite a couple of months ago, and it's now late, and it's come back now, and now it's redacted. Some majority of it is redacted, and now the Justice Department is saying it's untrue. But does labelling claims as untrue and sensationalist protect Trump, or risk dismissing legitimate allegations in the Epstein files?
I think should the Department of Justice actually make those assertions? They probably shouldn't, but they are part of the Trump administration, and I think it does undermine allegations that wrongdoing may have occurred. Yes, I do think so, but and I think the Department of Justice shouldn't be making judgments on the files that they're fake. How do they know they're fake? In what way are they fake? It's very unclear, and calling them sensationally, that's something a politician should say, not the Department of Justice.
And as the public you've briefly mentioned this, as the public receiving all of these millions and millions pages of documents, how can the public trust the handling of sensitive documents when politics and high-profile figures are involved?
I think what's clear from what we've seen, what came out overnight with Prince Andrew, or the former Prince Andrew, what's he called, Mountbatten now, and also with Bill Gates and with Peter Mandelson, the British politician, it's quite selective. Obviously, it's the journalists who get hold of it, and they decide what's newsworthy. And so they will publish stories that the British, for example, in Britain, the British public know about, or in America the same. So it's also the journalists making a selection of what stories they think are interesting, because there may be some quite powerful people who are not public names. I don't know, business people or hedge funders or whatever, who aren't very well known. And so newspapers or online sites aren't going to make a story out of it. But that doesn't mean that they aren't in there. The only way the public can really have access is if there is a link within the articles, so that members of the public can access that link. Otherwise, the newspapers are just going to pick out the stories that they think their readers will be interested in, and to be honest, what will generate clicks.
Yeah. Alison, don't go too far, as we will come back to you in just a moment. Newly released Department of Justice files show Elon Musk had more extensive and friendly communications with the infamous sex offender Jeffrey Epstein than previously known. Emails between the two moguls from 2012 and 2013 reveal a series of discussions about the Musk visiting Epstein's private island in Virgin Islands. These emails contradict Musk's long-standing denials about his connections to Epstein, in which he called Epstein a creep and claimed he repeatedly rejected Epstein's invitations to visit his island. In one exchange from December 2013, Musk asked, "We'll be in the Barts area over the holidays. Is there a good time to visit?" Epstein responded, "Any day, 1st to 8th. Play it by ear if you want. Always space for you." Musk and Epstein then discussed a specific visit in early January 2014, with Epstein expressing regret that Musk would need to stay in New York instead, ending the exchange with a disappointed message, "Hopefully we can schedule another time in the near future." In November 2012, Epstein asked Musk how many people would be with him for the helicopter ride to the island, to which Musk replied, "Probably just Tallulah and me." The exchange continued with Musk asking about parties on the island, saying he was looking for a wild party after a stressful year and not interested in a peaceful escape. Epstein replied, "Understood. I will see you on St. Barth." Epstein later added, "The ratio on my island might make Tallulah uncomfortable," to which Musk responded, "Ratio is not a problem for Tallulah." The documents also include Epstein's assistant Leslie Groff making arrangements for Epstein to have lunch with Musk at SpaceX in February 2013 and congratulating him after a SpaceX rocket launched in March of the same year. However, it is unclear whether the lunch ever took place or if Musk attended. Musk had been under pressure to address his connections to Epstein after previously revealed documents, including a calendar entry from 2014 that stated, "Reminder, Elon Musk to island December the 6th. Is this still happening?" Musk denied the allegation, calling it false on a post on X, formerly known as Twitter. We are now being joined back again by Alison Mutzler. Thank you so much for joining us back. What challenges do these high-profile figures face in managing reputation and public perception when historical emails or invitations are now surfacing in these documents like the newly released files?
Well, of course, that's it. When nobody's talking about legal wrongdoing here, but it is about, as you said, about public perception and social reputation. And the problem for someone like Elon Musk, and he's not the only one in this case, is that so far he's sought very assiduously to distance himself from Jeffrey Epstein and say that he barely knew him or he had nothing to do with him. And now those words are coming back to haunt him when we see a long series of emails. It's unclear from these emails whether he ever actually went to the island and took part in these parties, but it's clear that there was there was quite a significant exchange between the pair, and there were plans. So this is, for a start, socially embarrassing. It shows that Musk at best downplayed his interaction or his connections or relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, and at worst he lied, which means that does damage his reputation, because it means he can't be trusted, and that is damaging for him, whether or not he actually went there or not. But this is typical in this kind of case. Jeffrey Epstein was totally disgraced. He committed suicide. His former partner is in prison to do with people trafficking, sex trafficking, and nobody wants anything to do with him. At the time, they probably thought they were unassailable. They wouldn't be touched by justice. But as it began to come out, these people, I think, got scared, and including someone like Elon Musk. And so he tried to distance himself and said nothing happens. But now his data is coming out to contradict what he says. And whereas he might not have done anything criminal, there's absolutely no evidence of that. It is embarrassing for him. And it does show that he did, as I said, at best downplay his connection with Epstein, and at worst actually outright lied about it.
And does Musk's response, obviously, he was emphasizing that he declined all of his invites. Like, he got invites, but he never ever wanted to go or said he could go or something along those lines. Did they were they meaningfully addressed concerns raised by the file disclosures, or does it raise further questions about these elite social networks?
I think what it shows is there are these elite social networks, and they're nothing to do with politics. People who go out every day publicly and curse each other and you know, speak badly about each other behind the scenes are socializing and getting up to all kinds of you know, sordid, scurrilous things, as is the case with Epstein, and illegal and possibly illegal things as well. And at the moment, he's what we call passing. He's just kind of playing with words to distance himself. But it's clear whether, for whatever reason, he didn't go. It seems to have been there was a problem with his diary, that he had things that kept him in New York. He may not have done. But there's nothing in those emails that we've seen that show that he was actually distasteful, because he was actually opposed to going, because he would have answered it in a different way, saying from the start, I don't think I can come. But so I don't think it's very credible what he says, but there is no evidence of legal wrongdoing, just perhaps a massive social embarrassment. And again, I think the public will think, you know, probably quite truthfully, that there is a lot of behind the scenes, these people who claim perhaps to be rivals publicly are in fact great friends and partying and doing all kinds of unsavoury, scurrilous and even illegal things.
Mm. Thank you, Alison. Don't go too far, as we will be back with you in just a moment. According to the Palestinian Health Ministry, Israeli airstrikes in Gaza have killed at least 12 people, including children. One strike hit an apartment in Gaza City, killing 3 children and 2 women. Another strike hit a tent in Khan Yunis, further south. The Israeli ministry says it is investigating the reports and has not immediately confirmed carrying out the strikes. Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian is blaming the United States, Israel and Europe for fueling recent unrest across the country. He says foreign leaders exploited Iran's economic crisis and pushed people into the streets, accusing them of trying to tear the nation apart. The protests erupted in late December over soaring inflation and rising living costs. They lasted 2 weeks and ended after a violent crackdown. Iran's army chief has warned the United States and Israel against any attack, saying Iran's forces are on full alert following heavy US military deployments in the Gulf. General Amir Hatami says any mistake would threaten regional security. He also insists Iran's nuclear technology cannot be eliminated, even under pressure of threat from US airstrikes. We are being joined back again by Alison. Thank you so much for joining us back here again. How does Iran's assertion that its nuclear technology cannot be eliminated shape the strategic calculus for the US, Israel and their allies, especially in terms of deterrence and potentially military options?
I think it will probably harden their resolve, because here we have Tehran playing hardball. They're not backing down on this. It's something that has been a big issue, a bone of contention for the West for more, a couple of decades, about Iran's nuclear program, and the fact that Tehran is now saying that they won't back down and they will continue. This will be a factor in hardening the resolve. We're not saying there's going to be a military confrontation, but it's not going to be something that the Western, like the United States and Europe and Israel will like, for sure. That Iran is standing firm and saying that can continue its nuclear program.
Mm. Thank you so much, Alison, for joining us here today on NewsX World. Deadly violence has erupted in Pakistan's southwestern Balochistan province. At least 10 security personnel and 37 terrorists were killed after ethnic Baloch separatists launched coordinated attacks across the region. Officials say the assaults targeted more than a dozen locations earlier today. Security forces responded with counter-operations, killing dozens of terrorists and leaving several personnel injured. The attacks mark the latest escalation in the long-running insurgency in Balochistan, a province plagued by separatist violence and security challenges. I am now being joined by retired Colonel Sanjit Sarohi, who's an international relations and defence expert, joining us from New Delhi. Thank you so much for joining us here today on NewsX World. What does the scale and the coordination of these simultaneous attacks across multiple locations reveal about the current strength and tactics of separatist insurgent group in Pakistan's southwest?
Thank you, Ellie, for calling me on your news channel and discussing something very, very important. If you see, the Balochistan problem is not something very new. This problem has been for decades long. And basically, it is the insurgents, they follow the guerrilla tactics. And there are some areas in Balochistan where even the army personnel are scared of going there. So the simultaneous attack at 12 locations shows that there is a total coordination in the Balochistan Liberation Army, and they have been very, very active in some of the areas like Quetta, Pasni, Mastoon, Nushki and Gwadar district. So I think this has been going on for too long and they are asking for independence. And the basic reason, if you go into detail, is that the Balochistan is one of the richest states with lot of minerals, oils and gases, but it is the poorest in the country. It has got the poor education, employment and economic development. So there is a lot of frustration among the local inhabitants there. And as and when they get a chance, they strike the military personnel, security personnel, or even non-locals coming from other areas and other foreigners also, including the Chinese and other people coming from other countries. So it is a long-drawn battle which has been going on for quite some time. And unless Pakistan government talks to Balochistan people and sort out their problems and resolve their issues, I think this will carry on, and the day is not too far when it may happen that Balochistan is liberated from Pakistan.
And what does the high number of casualties among both security forces and militants tell us about the intensity of these attacks?
Look, the intensity of the attack is very, very severe. If you see, the last year, the train was hijacked in where there are about hundreds of people who were killed, including the security forces, and this has been going on for quite some time, and always there have been a lot of casualties. And when the figures comes out, you are not very sure about the figures also, because most of the figures are doctored in. Like if they are talking about that there were 37 militants who were killed, and only 10 security forces have been killed. So you have to take these figures with a pinch of salt, because they are not very sure that whether they are actual figures or they have been doctored. Ali.
And how might these losses affect Pakistan's strategy against militant groups in the southwest?
Look, if you go into details and you see the last year figure, there have been a lot of casualties of the security personnel. And this, because the problem is that it is not an open ground, it is a mountainous area, and it is very, very difficult for the security forces to find out where the insurgents are. And as and when they strike, it is a totally surprise is achieved. And whenever you are surprised by anyone, the casualties on your own side will be much more than on the other side. So I think the casualties have been quite high. And although Pakistan Army is a professional army and fighting for so long, they are doing their best to do whatever they could. But the problem is they are remote areas, and it is very, very difficult for the armed forces also to go in strength and take the necessary action. Ellie.
Thank you so much, Sanjit, for joining us here today on NewsX World. As per reports, thousands of young people marched for democracy in Myanmar after the military coup 5 years ago. Today, many of them are dead or still behind bars. According to prison monitoring groups, at least 74 political prisoners aged between 18 and 35 have died in detention since the 2021 coup. They were part of a generation that grew up with new freedoms during Myanmar's brief experiment with democracy. Students, activists and union members took to the streets, demanding their voices be heard. The military responded with a sweeping crackdown. Some protesters fled the country, while others were arrested and sent to prison. The United Nations has accused Myanmar's security forces of systematic abuse. The military government denies those claims for families and friends. The cost of demanding democracy has been devastating. Venezuelan opposition leader and Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Corina Machado has said that while the general amnesty law proposed by interim President Delcy Rodriguez was not celebrated by Venezuelans, it represents an irreversible and unstoppable path towards democracy and reconciliation. Let's listen in to what Maria Corina Machado had to say.
Obviamente no es algo que voluntariamente el régimen haya querido hacer, sino es producto de la presión real que ha recibido por parte del gobierno de los Estados Unidos. Ojalá sea así y ojalá los más de 700 presos que aún permanecen en los centros de tortura en Venezuela puedan estar con su familia muy pronto, Mike.
That's all we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
Hello and welcome to Deep Dive on NewsX World. I'm Asuma Katauka. We're breaking down the latest sanctions on Iran as the US and the European Union ramp up pressure on Tehran. These measures have far-reaching consequences for Iran, the region, and global politics. Let's dive deep into the details. The US has ramped up its sanctions on Iran, focusing on top officials after the deadly crackdown on anti-government protests. Among those sanctioned are Interior Minister Eskandar Momeini, responsible for overseeing the lethal law enforcement forces in Iran that has killed thousands of protesters. Also in the crosshairs, senior officers of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and Iranian investor Babak Morteza Zanjani, who is accused of embezzling billions from the Iranian people. For the first time, the U.S. Treasury has imposed sanctions on digital currency exchanges linked to Zanjani, exchanges that processed significant funds tied to the IRGC. This move aims to cut off Iran's access to global financial systems. The EU has also stepped up, designating the IRGC as a terrorist organization. They have imposed visa bans and asset freezes on Iranian officials and state entities. These sanctions target human rights violators and Tehran's military ties with Russia. It's clear the US and EU are sending a unified message. Iran must answer for its actions, both domestically and internationally. In response, Iran has retaliated, imposing its own sanctions on the EU. Tehran accuses the EU of interference in its internal affairs. This tit-for-tat exchange of sanctions has become a familiar pattern. Iran continues to resist pressure, using these sanctions as a rallying point to unite the country against the West. In a post on X, top Iranian security official Ali Larijani has wrote that under the resolution of Iran's Islamic Consultative Assembly, the armies of countries supporting the EU's move against the IRGC would be considered terrorist entities. The US and EU argue these sanctions are grounded in international law backed by the September 2025 snapback and UN mandates. The EU's 2026 designation of the IRGC as a terrorist group provides legal authority for freezing assets and blocking trade. The US has also previously threatened secondary sanctions like a 25% tariff on nations trading with Iran, aiming to isolate Tehran. But there's an opposing view, the anti-legality perspective. Human rights groups argue these sanctions violate sovereignty, hurting civilians more than the government. Critics say they amount to collective punishment, which is illegal under international humanitarian law. But the suffering is not just political. The Iranian economy is already failing, and the regime is dealing with the aftermath of the nationwide protests that has resulted in the deaths of thousands. Now, in the final week of January 2026, Iran's economy has entered a state of accelerated freefall characterized by a catastrophic currency collapse and hyperinflation. The Iranian rial has plunged to a historic low of 1.5 million to the US dollar, while point-to-point inflation has surged to 60%, rendering basic staples like bread and meat unaffordable for the average household. So, do sanctions work? The results are mixed. While sanctions like those in 2012 to 2013 crippled Iran's economy and forced negotiations, they often fail to achieve their primary goal, regime change. Instead, they can unite the population behind their leaders, a phenomenon known as the rally around the flag effect. Iran's government has also found ways to circumvent sanctions, using smuggling shadow fleets for oil trade and alternative trade partners like China and Turkey. These evasions dilute the effectiveness of sanctions, as Iran can still find ways to keep its economy afloat. So what's the bottom line? Will the US and EU sanctions succeed in forcing Iran to change its behavior, or will they only harden Iran's resolve? The effectiveness of sanctions remains uncertain. But one thing is clear, they are reshaping Iran's economy and political landscape. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Yossi Cooper-Rosser. He's an intelligence and security expert, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Mr. Cooper-Rosser, for joining us again.
Thank you.
Now, looking at this, with the EU finally joining the US in designating the IRGC as a terrorist organization, we have effectively seen the end of European middle ground diplomacy. Is this unified 2026 front a genuine strategy to force Tehran to the table, or is it simply the last remaining symbolic move in a toolkit that is running out of options?
Well, I think first and foremost, the European move is a move of protesting against what happened in Iran in the last couple of weeks, when so many Iranians were murdered by their own regime. That's the move that made the European take this decision and include the IRGC in their terror list. And it was not a move that was supposed to put more pressure on Iran as a country. Not that was the purpose. It was the only thing that was left in the toolkit of the Europeans in order to show that they are unhappy with what the Iranians are doing, what the Iranian regime is doing, and that something needs to be done, because you cannot just go on with business as usual when something like what the Iranian regime did happen. And whether it's going to put more pressure on Iran, yes, because if there were any deposits that belonging to the IRGC in European banks, then this is going to hurt them. But I don't think much of that was the case anyhow, because of previous sanctions. And the snapback of the sanctions back in September, October made it clear that no Iranian would leave his money in European banks. So I don't think this is something that's going to have a factual impact on Iran. It's a symbolic move.
Right. Thank you for highlighting that. Now, Tehran has retaliated by labeling Western armies as terrorist entities, creating a bizarre legal reality where both sides have now criminalized each other's state institution. In this environment of total legal paralysis, is there even a shred of gray zone left for back-channel diplomacy, or has the diplomatic bridge between them permanently burned?
No, it is not permanently burnt. The Iranians have their ways of reaching out to not only the Europeans, but definitely even the Americans, in order to deliver messages that show readiness to negotiate. We are familiar with the Turkish channel, and there are probably others that the Swiss are involved in that from time to time. And if the two sides want to reach an agreement, they will find a way to negotiate with each other. We don't have to worry about that. The question is whether the situation is going to convince the Iranians to go to conduct negotiations that would include receiving and accepting the conditions put forward by the United States. And there are two demands that the Americans have. One is that the Iranians will stop killing their own people, and that is a very difficult ask from the Iranians, because they don't have any other ways in order to deal with the unrest and the demand of the protesters to see a change in government. And the second demand is that the Iranians will give up the nuclear project and will stop demanding to be able to enrich uranium on their own soil. And this again is a very problematic ask from the Iranians by the Americans, because everybody understands that if they do that, the Iranians, this would mean a clear sign of weakness that might be interpreted by the people of Iran as an opportunity, especially if it is coincided with the commitment not to shoot at the public. They might see that as an opportunity to take action and remove the regime. And this is the problem that stands between having negotiations or not, and not the lack of channels.
Thank you for highlighting that. While the EU and US point to the September 2025 snapback as their legal bedrock, major powers like Russia and China have labeled the move a legal fiction with no binding force. If the world's rising economic powers refuse to recognize these mandates, isn't the West's attempt to enforce a global blockade actually a recipe for a fractured, de-dollarized international financial system?
No, first of all, the snapback was well based in the international law and well based in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, the agreement of 2015, that according to which the Europeans were conducting their attitude towards an Iran nuclear project. According to this agreement, it was clear that if one of the participants to the plan is going to decide that it is moving away from the plan, all sanctions are going to be put back in place, including all the sanctions of the United Nations, and there's not going to be a possibility for a veto by the main powers in the Security Council. And that's exactly what happened. At a certain point, it was the last minute, as a matter of fact, the three European partners to this agreement decided to leave the agreement and to snap back the sanctions. And China and Russia, in spite of their opposition to this move, were not able to stop it using their status as permanent members of the Security Council. And they became legal as of then, and that's the case. Now, Russia and China, friends of Iran, friends of not friends of Iran, as a matter of fact, friends of the Iranian regime, have decided that they are not going to abide by this decision of the international community, in spite of the fact that they were part of this plan that envisaged this possibility in advance. This is the problem is with China and Russia, not with the EU, and that's a pity, because I believe that if they would have joined in putting the sanctions, the chances that the Iranian regime would give up this interest in continuing the nuclear project, the chances will be much higher. They can't continue without the help of Russia and China. But Russia and China instead just help the Iranians ignore the sanctions. And of course, since their capabilities are limited, it didn't help much the Iranians, and we see the impact of the snapback of the sanctions on the Iranian rial that is diving into areas that no one ever thought it can reach. But this is the result of the legal sanctions put forward by the international community on behalf of the decision taken by the 3 European countries.
Right. And lastly, we are seeing a dual crush on the Iranian people. They are squeezed by the regime's internal corruption and the West's external sanctions. If the goal of the US and EU is to protect the Iranian people, how do they reconcile that with a 1.5 million rial exchange rate that punishes the middle class, lower class more than the elites? Does the West lose its moral authority when its policy results in the very humanitarian suffering it claims to oppose?
No, on the contrary, I think that everybody understands this is a crucial moment for the Iranian regime and for the Iranian people. Those who are not worrying about the fate and the well-being of the Iranian people are the Iranian regime. This is the player that is not caring at all about the well-being of the Iranian people. Not only that they are ready to let them suffer the economic sanctions, but they are ready also to kill them at point blank with their Basij and the IRGC forces. This is what we are watching. And the Iranian people is ready to go through the suffering, through the economic suffering, if this is going to rid it from the Iranian regime that treats him so badly. And yes, for bringing about a real change in Iran, the Iranian people has to go through suffering. This is not going to happen without any sacrifice. And they are ready to make the sacrifice. So you see that thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people were killed, murdered by the regime. And nevertheless, the people went out to the streets. So they understand that suffering, not only the economic suffering, but real sacrifice is necessary in order to bring about a change. And they really should be encouraged and praised for the courage they have shown so far. And I think what the Americans and the Europeans are expecting now to see is that due to the sanctions and due to the pressure put on the regime, the people will be more again ready to go to the streets and ask for their freedom. That's what needs to happen. And what the Americans are trying to do is to guarantee that the Iranian regime is not going to shoot at them.
With that, I'd like to thank Mr. Yossi Cooper-Rosser. Thank you very much for joining us on Deep Dive. That was all for this episode of the Deep Dive. Stay tuned to NewsX World for more news and updates.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome to Deep Dive on NewsX World. I'm Asuma Katauka. We turn our focus today to the most powerful seat in global finance, the chair of the U.S. Federal Reserve. President Donald Trump has announced his nominee today to replace the 16th U.S. Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell. As Powell prepares to step aside in May, the race to lead the world's most influential central bank has now narrowed to a high-stakes shortlist. So who has Trump chosen? He has announced former Federal Reserve Governor Kevin Warsh to head the U.S. Fed Central Bank. Mr. Warsh served on the Fed board during the 2008 financial crisis and has deep Wall Street ties. Trump previously passed him over for Powell 8 years ago, a decision he now reportedly regrets. The president had teased his choice last night, saying the pick is somebody that could have been there a few years ago. Mr. Kevin Warsh's rise to the top of the Federal Reserve is marked by a strategic move across finance, Capitol Hill, and economic policy making. Nominated by President Donald Trump as the 17th Fed chair, Mr. Warsh will replace Mr. Jerome Powell in May 2026. Mr. Warsh's career began at Morgan Stanley, advising major companies before joining President George W. Bush's administration in 2002. In 2006, he became a Fed governor, where his hawkish stance on inflation and interest rates set him apart, especially during the 2008 financial crisis. After leaving the Fed in 2011, Warsh continued shaping economic policy from the private sector. Now, as Fed chair, his leadership promises a shift towards stricter inflation control and closer ties to the White House. What was Trump's criteria for this job? The president has been blunt. He wanted someone who will slash interest rates. The stakes for this selection are monumental. Mr. Warsh, the next Fed chair, will not only manage the dollar, but will directly impact Trump's growth agenda heading into the second year of his term. The markets are bracing for a shift from the cautious hawkishness of the Powell era to a potentially aggressive new era of MAGA-nomics at the Fed. Pragmatism or loyalty, the world has found out today. Markets have already started reacting to the news. The DOW, S&P 500 and Nasdaq are all down in pre-market trading today. Investors are reacting to the latest market trends, with concerns growing over potential shifts in monetary policy following the news of Warsh's appointment as the next Federal Reserve chair. As the announcement has been made, the global financial order is watching to see if the independence of the Federal Reserve can survive a president determined to steer the economy from the Oval Office. In a turbulent 2026, the U.S. Central Bank is at crossroads, and the choice made today will echo through every market on the planet. Now, to discuss this, we are joined by Mr. Peter Cardillo. He's a chief economist at Spartan Capitals, joins us live from New York. Thank you very much, Mr. Cardillo, for joining us on Deep Dive.
Thank you.
Now, Mr. Cardillo, what do you feel about Trump's Fed pick, and what do you think he will bring to the table?
Well, I think it's actually a good pick. I think Wall Street is going to like it. I think Mr. Warsh, being a Wall Street man, was a Wall Street man, I should say, is going to preserve the independence of the Fed. In the past, he was very much somewhat of a hawk in terms of inflation, although recently he has indicated that perhaps inflation is not that much of a problem, basically aligning himself with President Trump. But I think the key point there is not so much as whether he is a hawk or a dove, but the fact that he undoubtedly will preserve the independence of the Fed. And I think the markets eventually will like that.
And how do you think Mr. Kevin Warsh's previous experience at the Federal Reserve during the 2008 financial crisis and as former economic advisor to ex-President Bush will influence his approach to the current economic challenges as Fed chair?
Yeah, well, as I said before, he was one who was looked upon as a governor who favored lower balance sheets and basically stuck to the rules. So, during the financial crisis, everyone was out there to try to save what was possible, and his moves went along with what was in need at that time. So I suspect that that probably could be we could see a repeat of that from now in the present situation. But remember that we're not really in any major crises. So what we have here now is inflation that has come down, but is still elevated, still far from the Fed's targets, and so it's not really a crisis. So I would expect that he's going to take everything into considerations. And remember, his term doesn't start until May, so he has chance to see what the effects, what are the inflationary effects from tariffs are at that time. They might be lower, and that would give him a free hand to loosen credit.
Thank you for highlighting that, Mr. Cardillo. And now, with Warsh's shift towards supporting lower interest rates recently, how do you think his leadership will balance Trump's desire for a more rate-friendly policy with the Fed's traditional independence and focus on long-term economic stability?
Well, like I said before, you know, he was an ex-Wall Street man. He worked on Wall Street. He knows Wall Street. He knows what the markets want. And so I don't think he's going to do anything that would put the markets in, that would question the markets. And certainly he's not, Trump's, his pick as nomination is not one that perhaps maybe the market was fearing. Total alliance to the White House. I don't think that's going to be the case. He might be a little bit more liberal in terms of lowering inflation, lowering rates on inflation. But I think bottom line is he's still going to do what's good for the economy and what the Fed's mandate is all about.
Right. And now, last but not least, we cannot ignore the ongoing investigation into Mr. Jerome Powell regarding Fed buildings renovations, which many see as a political pressure tactic. So does this investigation serve as a warning to the incoming chair that any future defiance of the Oval Office could lead to personal legal scrutiny?
Well, you know, Mr. Trump is famous for speaking aloud what he thinks, and I'm sure that if Mr. Walsh doesn't do what Mr. Trump wants him to do immediately or would like him to do, that he'll criticize him. You know, he just said something the other day. I happened to hear it while he was giving a speech that that when people get the jobs, they sort of change. So maybe he was already hinting that you know, Fed nominee Walsh might not actually execute what his wishes are. So I think we keep that in the back of our minds.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Peter Cardillo for joining us today from New York and sharing that insight. Thank you. Now that was all for this episode of Deep Dive. Stay tuned to NewsX World for more news and updates. Hello and welcome. I'm Asima Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. The The U.S. Justice Department releases 3 million pages, 180,000 images, and 2,000 videos linked to Jeffrey Epstein. The release comes after a missed legal deadline, with officials saying it ends a major review to ensure transparency. The U.S. government enters a partial shutdown after Congress fails to pass a 2026 budget. Lawmakers signal a quick fix as the House moves to ratify a Senate-backed deal next week. According to a statement by the Danish Foreign Ministry, Denmark will reopen its embassy in Damascus after a 14-year closure, with Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen saying embassy will resume operations to better monitor developments and boost cooperation with Syria. The U.S. Chief of Mission for Venezuela is set to arrive in Caracas as the government proposes a broad amnesty law. Acting President Delcy Rodriguez says the bill could free hundreds of political detainees and transform a notorious prison. Iran says it is ready for fair and equitable talks with the United States as regional tensions continue to rise. President Donald Trump refuses to rule out military action, while Tehran says negotiations cannot occur under threats. Washington approves $6.67 billion in arms sales to Israel amid a fragile Gaza ceasefire. The package includes 30 Apache attack helicopters and infantry assault vehicles, according to the State's Department. According to local officials, at least 200 people were killed after heavy rains triggered devastating landslides at a mine in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, which is controlled by M23 rebels, while authorities warned the toll could rise as rescue operations continue. According to international media reports, Guinea-Bissau has opposition leader Domingos Simões Pereira was released from jail on Friday after months in detention following the November military coup that ousted President Umaro Sissoco Embalo just days after presidential elections. Now for this hour, we start with the U.S. Survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's alleged abuses have shared their outrage following the U.S. government's release of millions of pages from the Epstein's files on January 30 this year. In a powerful statement, the survivors claimed that the identifying information about them remains in the documents, while the men who allegedly abused them continue to be hidden and protected. The letter, signed by 19 survivors, some using aliases, demands the full release of the Epstein files and calls for Attorney General Pam Bondi to address these concerns when she testifies before Congress next month. The survivors asserted that while the files include explicit details about their trauma, the abusers remain safe, their names omitted or left redacted, while the victim's identity is exposed. These allegations come after the Justice Department's release of over 3 million documents, which include at least 180,000 images and 2,000 videos linked to the Epstein case, while some documents contained untrue and sensationalist claims about Trump, according to the department. The files have only further fueled the controversy surrounding the case. Survivors' call for full transparency highlights the lingering fears of victimization and the pain of seeing their suffering revealed without the protection they deserve. They demand that all the information be made available and that justice be served in their cases. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Ben Aris. He's a former Moscow bureau chief of the Daily Telegraph, joins us live from Berlin. Thank you very much, Mr. Aris, for joining us again. Good to see you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Now, what are we to make of this latest releases of Jeffrey Epstein files?
It's a huge scandal, isn't it? I mean, the president, sitting president, has been accused of raping 13-year-old girls, and moreover, some of the other victims have completely disappeared. Don't know where they are. And in any normal country, this should have sparked a full investigation, criminal charges if applicable. Epstein himself was a convicted paedophile. The fact of his so-called suicide in jail is also highly suspicious, and yet the whole thing is being swept under the rug. The State Department, Pam Bondi is obscuring the investigation. They haven't released details. There hasn't been a proper formal investigation. At the very least, one would have thought that given the severity of the claims against Trump in particular, but not just, it seems to be a lot of the elite in the States, not just politicians, but business people. Even Prince Andrew has been caught up in this from the UK. And nothing's happening.